a man burdened by bags of refuse, and she felt a momentary pang of sympathy, though she remained steadfast in her decision. Later that evening, the scene shifted from the sterile halls of government to the cozy, if slightly chaotic, confines of Mel's home. The transition from councilwoman to guardian had been abrupt and jarring. Her sister was currently residing in a federal prison, and her brother-in-law had vanished into the shadows of a massive financial scandal, leaving Mel to care for their two children, Lennox and Ryder. The house was no longer a sanctuary of quiet evenings and wine. It was a battlefield of teenage angst and middle school confusion. Mel sat on the sofa, watching the local news coverage of her earlier meeting. Her assistant, Rhonda, was there, providing the kind of blunt honesty that Mel both needed and dreaded. "Look at you," Rhonda remarked, pointing at the television screen. "Public servant by day, hottie by night." Mel smiled, a tired but genuine expression. "Well, I have to turn on the heat during the day or nobody gets anything done," she quipped. She watched herself on the screen, noting the way she handled the angry garbage man. She looked composed, a portrait of the esteemed senator's daughter. It reminded her of her father, a man whose reputation for authority was legendary. "Did I smell like strippers?" Mel asked, a sudden worry crossing her mind as she thought about the frantic energy of the day. "No," Rhonda replied with a laugh. "You smelled like authority." "That is my fragrance," Mel said, leaning back into the cushions. "I have to say, in all humility, I was smoking." However, the celebratory mood was short-lived. The reality of her new life came walking through the front door in the form of Lennox, her 15-year-old niece. Lennox was a girl of intellect and sharp edges, currently mourning the loss of her former life of luxury. Behind her came Ryder, younger and perhaps more bewildered by the sudden change in their family's fortunes. "Aunt Mel, why are angry white guys throwing trash at our front door?" Lennox asked, her voice dripping with the sarcasm that had become her primary defense mechanism. Mel sighed, realizing that her political decisions were now literally landing on her doorstep. "There is a political debate in the community," she started to explain, but she could see Lennox's eyes glazing over. "This is getting heavy," the girl remarked, turning to head upstairs. "And really smelly." Ryder followed his sister, carrying a heavy silence that was just as loud as Lennox's complaints. "Hey, Lennox," Mel called out, trying to bridge the growing gap between them. "Did you see the dresser I put in your room?" "Yeah, it is really cute, but I am okay," Lennox replied without looking back. "I have got suitcases." The word stung. It was a clear sign that Lennox viewed her stay at Mel's house as a temporary inconvenience, a stopover before life returned to normal. But normal was a long way off. Mel turned to Rhonda, the frustration bubbling to the surface. "She no longer tells me what she thinks," Mel lamented. "I used to be the cool aunt. We were going to get matching tattoos. Now, I am the monster who puts furniture in her room." Rhonda looked at her with a knowing expression. "Don't you remember what you were like at 15? She asked. Mel paused, a distant look in her eyes. "Not very clearly," she admitted. "I did a lot of drinking then." The challenges of parenting were not the only things on Mel's plate. She was also trying to reclaim some semblance of her own life. She had a date planned for the evening, her first since the children had moved in. She was nervous, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. She stood in front of the mirror, holding up two different outfits for Rhonda's inspection. "These say smart, independent, bright political future," she said of the first set. "These say former bad girl." Rhonda pointed to the more daring option. "She's back," she said with a grin. But the night was not destined for romance. The telephone rang, and the caller ID displayed the name of Lennox's school principal. Mel's heart sank. When a principal calls after hours, it is rarely to offer a compliment. "Melbourne, this is Principal Liz Lunt," the voice on the other end said, sounding strained. Mel felt a cold sweat break out. What did she do? She asked, her mind racing through the possibilities. As it turned out, Lennox had decided to express her creative side in a way that the school administration found less than poetic. She had distributed flyers containing an original poem that used the principal's name in a rhyme that was, according to Ms. Lunt, highly inappropriate. The result was an immediate suspension. 2 months, Mel muttered after hanging up the phone. 2 months living with me and she gets suspended. I am the legal guardian of the year. Rhonda, ever the voice of reason, made a suggestion she had made many times before. I keep telling you, hire somebody. An organizer, a professional. Those kids need structure and discipline. You cannot do everything. Mel knew she was right, but the prospect of bringing a stranger into their fragile family dynamic was daunting. I can certainly do this, she insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. It is just a matter of setting that girl straight. The next morning, the situation escalated. Mel was trying to prepare for a meeting at the school when a man appeared at her door. He was the same man who had caused a scene at the council meeting earlier, demanding to know the whereabouts of Mel's brother-in-law and the money he had stolen. I was a jackass down at City Hall, the man said, though his apology felt more like a prelude to another interrogation. I never should have crashed your meeting. But where is he? Where is the money? Bolivia, Mel shouted, her frustration finally boiling over. Louis is in Bolivia. The man, whose name was Joe Longo, flinched. He was a man who had lost everything in the financial collapse caused by Mel's relative. He had been a successful commodities trader, a man who once handled millions of dollars with ease. Now he was a man living in his car, searching for a way to reclaim his life. I don't know where he is, Mel said, her voice softening as she saw the genuine despair in Joe's eyes. Now get lost and leave me alone. But Joe was persistent. He didn't just want answers, he wanted a job. He had seen the city budget online and had ideas on how to fix it. Hire me and I will double your rate of return, he proposed. Mel looked at him as if he were a lunatic. You are Joe Longo? She asked, recognizing the name from the reports. You ran the commodities division. You made millions. Legitimate millions, Joe corrected her, which your bastard brother-in-law pissed away. Mel felt a wave of guilt, even though she wasn't responsible for her brother-in-law's crimes. I am really sorry you lost your job, she said. That is old news, Joe replied. Yesterday I lost my condo, and now they are about to repossess my car. My wife has decamped to her mother's house. Despite her own problems, Mel couldn't help but feel for the man. However, she had her own crisis to manage. I have got meetings, a trash revolt, a kid on the brink, and I am in desperate need of professional help for the household, she told him. Joe looked at the flyer Mel had for a nanny position. You are not going to find anybody this way, he said, glancing at the salary. This salary sucks. It includes meals, Mel argued. Joe looked at her, a spark of an idea forming in his mind. He needed a place to live, and she needed someone to manage the chaos. He had experience with kids, having run a youth center right after college. He was, in his own words, Charles in charge. I can start today, Joe offered. Mel was skeptical. You do know we are talking about a nanny here, right? There are children involved. I was in charge of 50 teenagers, Joe reminded her. Cooked them meals, helped them with their homework. The desperation in Mel's life finally met the desperation in Joe's. She didn't necessarily like him, but she was out of options. The city was in an uproar, her niece was suspended, and her own life was falling apart. Fine, she said. Let's give it a shot. The first day of Joe's tenure as the household manager was nothing short of transformative. He didn't just walk into the house, he took command of it. He found the laundry piling up and the kitchen in a state of neglect. He discovered that Ryder had skipped out on his history paper and that Lennox had disappeared instead of attending the mandatory meeting with the principal. When Mel returned home, she found Joe in the kitchen, preparing a meal that actually smelled like real food. What is he doing home? She asked, seeing Ryder at the table. Writing his history paper, Joe replied calmly. He told me he didn't have it, so I brought him home and told him he doesn't come out until it is done. Mel was stunned. You brought him home? You leave him at school to get yelled at. Those are the rules. I never heard of them, Joe said, unfazed.